Hi guys and welcome. I wanted to cover a few of the common questions here, and this will be a reoccurring recording. Hopefully we'll get some help on the homework and answer some questions during this. If you aren't able to make the recording, you can also post your questions in the homework discussion board, and I'll answer them there as well as cover them during this call. So real quick, I wanted to touch base on the homework format and some of the reasoning behind it. What you see on the screen is an example of a perfectly completed homework submission. This student chose to use Wiley Plus. And the submission shows a screenshot of the Wiley Plus completion with the score, and then it also shows the solution descriptions. And as you can see, the descriptions really don't need to be a whole lot. My reason behind this is that twofold. One, Wiley has been inconsistent the last couple of terms in the correct answers in the homework, which is why I make it optional and it's just for you to use to practice. If you do get a good score in Wiley, you can post that instead of showing your work. If this student were not to have used Wiley, then a screenshot of each of the Excel solutions or an explanation of the formula that they used would be appropriate in place of the Wiley screenshot. In this case, the Wiley screenshot is perfect, and then the solution descriptions, my goal is for you to be able to understand what these mean, not just that you were able to get to them. In this case, this was the upper and lower control limits, so the control chart homework, but that you know what that means. So in this case, we're looking at statistical quality control, and this allows us to pull samples so we don't have to inspect each and every item. For example, boxes of cereal, we know that if it's a 13-ounce box of cereal, that it's going to probably be somewhere between 12.9 ounces and 13.1 ounces, for example. A couple of different charts allow us to get to that acceptable range. And then once we have that acceptable range, we can monitor a sampling of our product. So as Deming says, reduce the need for inspection and build quality in. Well, this is one way that we can ensure that we're building quality in and that we're still being able to monitor our quality without inspecting each and every one. So knowing where it falls outside of that upper and lower control limit is what's important, and that's what you're looking at in these problems. So for example, this particular student identified what the range was and what the upper and lower control limit was, and that 4 out of 5 consecutive points fall within the control limits. Another way to say this is that the system is not in control. There's 1 point not in control, and which one is that? You can say it either way. The things that we ask when we're looking at these is, if there is a point out of the control limits, why did that point fall outside of the control limits? And I refer back to Deming again, who says that we want to eliminate blame because blame doesn't solve the problem, and that the quality and process failures are the fault of management. It's our job in management to design a process that the employees can be successful in, and to design and to provide the equipment and resources that enable a process to be successful. So whether it's service or a production, it's important that we design a doable process. If, for example, we aren't providing the right equipment to our employees, but then we're blaming them when something falls outside of the control limits, we're not identifying the underlying problem and we're not solving the process problem. So in this case, we have one point that's outside. Some questions that may ask is, what time was this? What equipment was being used? Who was working? Is there a training issue maybe? Was there a hiring issue? Maybe the person belongs in a better suited role. Is this a one-off? Is this an internal or an external failure? So you'll remember from your reading that internal failures can be those things such as training and equipment, a failure of the process. External failures can be supplier issues. Maybe we received a bad batch of supplies. Maybe there was a giant storm that prevented supplies from getting to us or that affected the availability of resources. Whatever the case may be, there may be external or internal failures, but the control chart doesn't give us the point to place the blame. It gives us the questions to ask to be able to identify the underlying problem or the source of the issue with the process. So simply put, a quick one or two sentence explanation of what the solution is telling us. So this problem 4.1, for example, the reliability of the network is 72.9, meaning the complaints are justified. That's a perfect explanation. So this, like I said, I'm using this as an example of what the homework should look like. I know there's been a lot of questions on that. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to one of the homework problems that we have. This deals with, so this is problem 7.6. So this deals with adjacent loads or load summaries. And if you'll imagine, for example, an actual factory floor, and again, this could be a service piece too. We could have different components of a service being completed where the process has to move through different departments. So for example, an accounting service, maybe there's one person that enters in accounts payable, one that enters in accounts receivable. When we're dealing with those types of industries, oftentimes we're not actually moving physical product. We're working in a virtual world, but it's still important to design a network or a system where access to resources and steps to completion are put in the right order to minimize movement. So one of the underlying researchers in this is the Gilbreths, and they looked at motions, and they identified that there's a right way to do things as opposed to the right person. And by eliminating motions, placing different departments, machines, what have you, in the right places, eliminated the need to move, eliminated specific movements that then reduced time and improved efficiency and allow for quality again to be built in. So what this section does, what Chapter 7 and 7S are looking at, is this load balancing. So if we were to look at this, and I'll show you how this can be done in Excel, there is an Excel spreadsheet available in Wiley Plus for this, but you can also do this by hand. So if we look at this one, for example, we see, and this is from going down and 2 going across. So we see that 1 and 2 have to share 100 pieces. So from 1 to 2 is 100. From 1 to 3 is 75. From 1 to 5 is 100. And from 1 to 6 is 60. So molding sends to cutting, fiberglass weaving, finishing, and waxing. So we're first going to look at which ones have the most connections. So we see that 1 and 5 have the most connections. We see that 1 needs to be next to 2, 3, 5, and 6, and 5 needs to be next to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So if we're looking at various patterns, we know that these guys, 1 and 5, should be in the center. So let me switch over to our Excel piece. So here we have it in Excel, and I purposely changed the solution so that it's not in the right order. So if we're picturing this, we know that the only way to have 1 and 5 next to or adjacent, and adjacent can be next to, diagonal, or up and down. We know the only way for 1 and 5 to be placed in next to all of the other departments is to put them in the middle. And really, because of diagonal access, they don't need to be in this specific order. You could have 5 on top and 1 on the bottom. So let's take a look at our other departments. Let's take a look at 2. 2 needs to be adjacent to 1. We have that. 4 and 5. Well, again, because 1 and 5 are in the center, 2 can be either top or bottom, but we know that it also needs to be adjacent to 4. So we're going to put 2 and 4 together. And then so that if it works out correctly, then our last two, 6 and 3, should also have to be connected. And so if we look at 6, or we look at 3, 3 needs to be connected to 1 and 5. That's fine because it's in the center. And 6 needs to be connected to 1 and 5. So that's perfect. They don't need to connect to 2 and 4. They're not going to be adjacent. And they don't need to even be connected to each other. So if we put 1, 3, or if we put 2, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in that order, and they can again be flopped, we can see that in this Excel model that there are no non-adjacent loads. So anytime we have a 0 here, it means that we're not carrying. If, for example, we switched these, we can see now that there is a non-adjacent load of 40 or of 95, and we can see where that's going to happen. 2 to 4. So having to move 45 units to number 2 from 4, or vice versa, from 2 to 4, it has to go through 2 crosses. So we see it goes over 1 and then up 1 at an angle. So we multiply that 45, and then we also have, so we have to have 45 there. It's an extra non-adjacent load. And then we should also have it go in the other direction from 4 to 2. And it looks like 3 to 4. Oh, it's greater than 3, sorry. So that's how we get our non-adjacent loads. So we want to pick the solution that aligns 2 and 4, 1 and 5, and 3 and 6. So if we go over to the solution set in Wiley, we again see, and again, here they have it as 4 and 2. These can be flipped without causing any other non-adjacent load issues. The other problem that we have in Wiley And let me switch back to our Excel. Deals with weighted scores. So one way that we can make objective decisions, and that's really what all of this is giving us some way to quantify and make objective decisions. As humans, we tend to make our decisions with some level of emotional response. In this case, if we wanted to really pursue Shanghai, for example, as an option, maybe we felt a particular affinity towards Shanghai as a location, we may make that decision and then ultimately regret it. So we can separate out that emotional connection with our decisions by using a weighted system. And in this case, we went through and weighted the importance of these factors: political stability, economic growth, by which was most important. So if we start with 100 points or 100%, we felt that political stability should represent 1/4 of the factor that we considered when making our decision. And economic growth should represent 18%. Now, some of this can be a little subjective, but we can also use economic factors or impact factors on the finance side to determine the best balance for growth in these locations. However the company chooses to develop these weights then can be used in conjunction with a scoring system. So separately from developing the weights, we've gone through and scored, and the book has already done this for you, scored Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore based on these factors without considering the weights. So for example, for political stability, they scored Shanghai at 50, Hong Kong at 80, and Singapore at 90. Once we have these factors or these scores, we can then weight our scores appropriately. And there's two ways we can do this. The easiest way is to multiply each weight times each factor. And if you use F4 on your keyboard, you can lock down a cell. So even though I want to change, when I copy this over to here, even though I want to change the D5 reference to Shanghai so that I'm referencing Hong Kong over here, I don't want to change my weight. So then we can copy that down, and we can also move this column over. And see, now we're still referencing the weight, but we're now referencing the score for Hong Kong. And we can do this again for for Singapore. And now we can use the sum function to total all of our scores. Oh, whoops. And it also helps then to make sure when you're using the F4 that you're locking down only the C and not the 5. So if you hit F4 more than once, now we're only have the $ in front of the C and not the 5. So we need to correct that. So now we're referencing column C. That has to stay, but we're going to move our cells down. So we need to copy this back up. And then recopy this over. And now we should have the correct formulas in each one. And again, there we go, C12 and F12. So those are referencing the correct ones. And now we get a sum score of 6470 for Shanghai, 8110 for Hong Kong, and 8055 for Singapore. Alternatively, you can also use the sum product function. So we're going to use sum product, and we're going to select this column, or sorry, our weighted column first, then our score column, and that will do the sum of the product between this one and this one, this one and this one, this one and this one, and so on. So that's two different ways. So here again, sum product, it chooses the weights, and then the multiplied by for the second column. Either method works, and you'll see then that despite our affinity for one location over the other, the actual best option then is going to be Hong Kong, because based on the weights that we gave it and the scores that we awarded each one, we now can make a more objective decision. And anytime, and you're going to see this method through several different other options. So the expected value you ran into with decision tree, it's the same formula. Expected value, weighted outcome. There's a number of different things that we call it or use this formula for, but it's always the probability times the outcome plus the probability of 2 times the outcome of 2, and so on. So the probability of 1, or the probability of political stability, times the scored outcome for Shanghai, plus the probability of economic growth, times the scored outcome for Shanghai. And again, you saw that in decision analysis with the decision trees and as expected value. But anytime you have a question that deals with weighted or expected value, you're using the same formula, which is the probability of 1 times the outcome of 1, and the probability plus the probability of 2, and so on, depending on how many probabilities you have, or weights. Probability is weights. So probability comes from decision analysis, weights comes from weighted outcome, and also outcome equals score or value for weights. So this is just translating it from one method to another method, but it's the same concept. So I hope that this little video helps as you work through the next set of homework problems. Again, we'll schedule another one of these for next week, and I will post that video as well. In the meantime, please feel free to use the discussion board for questions, and good luck with the homework. Let me know if you have any other questions.